Happiness. We travel all over the world trying to find it. The yoga retreat in Bali, the week of silence in Big Sur, the temple high in the Himalayas. But here's the thing, we may all be late to the game. Because the more researchers have looked into this question, the more it seems like the secret to happiness was actually discovered a long time ago in Switzerland by a guy who looked like the wacky neighbor on a sitcom. This is Arthur Brooks, and he's had quite a life. Because he started his career playing the French horn in an orchestra in Barcelona, and then pivoted into being the president of one of America's largest think tanks, and then followed that up by becoming a Harvard professor and co-authoring a book with Oprah. Impressive? Yes. Impressive to the point of being borderline annoying? Also yes. So, what do you do next when you've had a career like that? Well, Arthur Brooks' answer to that question was to turn to one of the biggest questions facing humanity: happiness. What actually makes us happy? Now, obviously, that's a question that interests a lot of people. But what makes Brooks' approach different is that he's not looking for the answer in self-help books. He's looking at what the best social science research tells us. And in his 2025 book, The Happiness Files, Brooks compiled all that work into one place. And two big findings jumped out. Number one, there are lots of reliable rules as to what creates happiness. And number two, most of them were figured out in 1960 by a senior citizen. Which might sound crazy, except for this was no ordinary senior citizen. The man in question was the legendary Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, whose name you may not know, but whose ideas you definitely do. Got a complex about something? That's a concept that came from Carl Jung. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Doesn't matter, both categories came from Jung. Archetypes? Also a Jungian concept, and one that provided part of George Lucas's inspiration for Star Wars. So before you get too enamored of Jung, remember, he's indirectly responsible for the prequels. Why does Jung interest Arthur Brooks? Because in 1960, on the precipice of his 85th birthday, Jung was asked by an interviewer what the basic factors necessary for happiness were. And he responded with 5 pillars for a happy life. And when Brooks compared them to the research, it turned out Jung largely got it right. So, what are those 5 pillars for a happy life? First, maintaining good physical and mental health. The most comprehensive study on happiness ever done, Harvard's long-running study of adult development, found that 4 of the best predictors of happiness as we enter old age are keeping a healthy body weight, getting enough exercise, not smoking too much, and not drinking too much. And if all that's too much to remember, just think of it as don't do anything Orson Welles would have done.
Ah, the French champagne.
And if anything, maintaining your mental health is even more important. In fact, a 2013 study found that mental health is the single most important factor for life satisfaction, which may not sound that helpful. After all, we'd all like to have good mental health, but how do we get it? Well, actually, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here, because that same study found that anxiety and depression are by far the most common mental health issues. Treatment for them has a pretty robust success rate, but lots of people just haven't gotten themselves help yet. Jung's second pillar of happiness? Good personal and intimate relationships. Which, again, might seem obvious, but just how much of a difference it makes may surprise you. That long-running Harvard study showed unambiguous results. The measures of our social connectedness, happy marriages, close relationships with friends, strong bonds between parents and children, not only are essential to happiness, but are also predictive of everything from career success to better health. The trend was so clear that the director of that study, George Valent, summed up its findings as happiness equals love. Full stop. Third on Jung's list, satisfying work and a reasonable standard of living. We know from the research, for instance, that people who are unemployed suffer unhappiness that goes beyond just having a lack of resources. It's also about having a lack of purpose. And Arthur Brooks' research adds more texture to Jung's insight, because Brooks has found that while having more money definitely doesn't hurt when it comes to happiness, in many ways the deepest value that work can give us is a sense of meaning. Both through a sense that our efforts have led to accomplishment, what Brooks calls earned success, and through a sense that we're useful to others. As for the other factors Jung identified, they're a little more transcendent. His fourth pillar of happiness was seeing beauty in art and nature. And here, Jung was onto something, but as Arthur Brooks points out, those two categories are a little different from each other. It really is true that connecting with nature has been shown to have positive effects on well-being, a finding that's consistent across cultures. Researchers found the effect in places as varied as Canada, Japan, and even Russia. Look, in some places you just have to take what you can get. When it comes to art, however, the results are a little more mixed. Yes, it can be a powerful influence, but in both directions. In fact, art's a little like a narcotic. So if you're alone listening to happy music, it really will make you feel happier. But research shows that if you're alone listening to sad music, it'll make you sadder. And as Brooks himself put it, newsflash, artists are generally not the world's most blissfully satisfied people. Jung was on firmer ground, however, with his fifth and final pillar of a happy life, a philosophical or religious outlook that fosters resilience. The evidence here is pretty striking. Research has found that people's levels of spirituality are highly correlated with their sense of meaning in life. It's found that religion and spirituality tend to insulate people against depression and anxiety. And it's even found that people being treated for serious illnesses report a better quality of life if their treatment includes a religious figure, like a chaplain, in addition to their medical team. But as Brooks is quick to point out, this isn't specific to any one system of belief, or even faith. Even secular philosophies like Stoicism have been shown to have the same kinds of benefits. What matters is finding a system of thought that allows you to put things into perspective, which is something that you can get from a lot of different schools of thought. Though, not all schools of thought.
Our beliefs are fairly commonplace and simple to understand. Humankind is simply materialized color operating on the 49th vibration.
So, what do you get when you put all these principles together? A surprisingly optimistic outlook. Because while these keys to happiness may not be easy, they are straightforward. You don't need an expensive retreat or a personal guru to accomplish them. They're within our reach. We may not reach a transcendent nirvana at the end of that road, but with time and effort, we can all become consistently that much happier. Thanks to just a few pointers from Carl Jung and a few more from Arthur Brooks, and absolutely none from Orson Welles.
Action, please.
Ah, the French.